Saturday night, 1971. County fairgrounds somewhere in the Midwest. Dust rising off the pole track like the earth itself was breathing. You could smell the diesel, the fresh-turned dirt, hear the roar of a crowd that knew what they were about to see. Green John Deere 4020, hooked to the sled. That tractor had owned this county for 30 years straight. Nobody'd beaten it. Not once. You could see it in how the driver sat, confident, almost bored, like he was just going through the motions. Then the red iron rolled up next. International Harvester 1066. Farmer standing next to me, old-timer, wore Deere green his whole life. He just shook his head. IH has got no business being here, he said. Nobody'd given the Harvester a real chance. The sled got loaded. The 4020 pulled first. Impressive. Steady. That's what the green machine did. It was dependable, powerful in its own way. Then the 1066 hooked in. The sled moved. But it didn't feel like a fair fight. The Harvester didn't just match it. It walked through that load like the sled weighed nothing. Buried the 4020. Not even close. By Monday morning, farmers were lined up at the IH dealer. The county's loyalty flipped, just like that. Here's the question that's going to stick with us. What happened under the hood that changed everything? To understand why the 1066 won, you have to understand what made the 4020 so legendary in the first place. It's the only way the story makes sense. The John Deere 4020 built the company's empire in the 1960s. Over 185,000 units sold. That's not a number you throw around. That's dominance. That's a tractor that earned the trust of a generation. Farmers bought them because they worked. Day in, day out, they worked. The 4020 was engineered for precision, closed center hydraulics, power shift transmission. It was built for row crop work, for loader jobs, for farmers who needed finesse and control. The 404 cubic inch engine was naturally aspirated, meaning no turbo, no tricks, just clean, reliable horsepower. Around 94 to 95 PTO horsepower, depending on the year. It wasn't about raw torque. It was about doing the job right. And here's the thing. It did exactly what it was designed to do. The problem was what it wasn't designed to do. See, the 4020's hydraulic system was closed center. That means the charge pump had to feed everything. Your steering, your brakes, your implements. All of it. Now, that system worked great in the field. You're plowing, you're making turns, you're hooking implements. Life is good. But pull a heavy sled for hours. Keep that load constant. That pump gets starved. It's like asking a well to feed your whole farm and then realizing the well's running dry. The system wasn't built for that kind of sustained punishment. Then there's the power shift transmission. 8 forward speeds. Sounded revolutionary at the time. And it was. But those gear ratios were locked solid. You couldn't adjust them. You couldn't turn it up without sending it back to the factory. The transmission did what it was told, but it couldn't adapt. The real problem wasn't the engineering. The engineering was solid. The problem was the philosophy. The 4020 was built to think. It was designed for a farmer who knew what he needed and wanted a refined machine to get it done. The sled didn't care about thinking. The sled just wanted to get pulled. And when the weight stayed heavy, that refinement became a liability instead of an asset. Then the 1066 showed up, and it didn't apologize for what it was. International Harvester didn't try to out-finesse John Deere. They understood something the industry missed. Sometimes farmers don't need refinement. Sometimes they need a hammer. The 1066 rolled onto the scene in 1971 with 414 cubic inches and a factory turbo bolted right to it. That's 14 more cubes than the 4020. 14. And that turbo wasn't some afterthought. It was engineered in from the start. Boost. Real boost. The kind that made a difference when the load got heavy. But the real story wasn't just the displacement. It was the philosophy underneath it. The DT414 engine came with wet sleeves. You know what that means? It means if that block started to fatigue, if something wore past tolerance, a mechanic could pull the entire thing out in frame. No dropping the whole engine. No taking off the head and half the tractor. You could overhaul it right there in the frame while the rest of the machine sat in the yard. That's efficiency. That's understanding what a farmer actually needs. The hydraulic system was open center. Simple, dumb, reliable. It didn't think. It didn't get clever. It just flowed. When you needed hydraulic pressure, it went where you needed it. When you didn't, the oil just circulated back. Under a sustained heavy load, the kind of load that starved the 4020's charge pump, the open center system stayed calm. No starvation, no surprises, just honest mechanical function. Now here's where the story gets interesting. The 1066 had the torque amplifier, the TA. This wasn't new technology. IH had been running TAs since the 1950s. But in the 1066, it became a weapon. While the 4020 had 8 locked-in power shift speeds, the TA gave the 1066 10 forward gears. But it did something else, something that mattered at the pole. The TA was a mechanical multiplier. When you engaged it, you dropped the gear ratio down by 48%. That meant your pulling power went up by 48% without losing momentum. You could shift on the go. No clutch, no waiting. The sled got heavier, you hit the TA, the ratio changed, and the 1066 just kept pulling. The 4020 driver couldn't do that. When the sled got heavy, he had to shift the power shift. And shifting meant losing momentum. It meant breaking the pull. It meant the sled stopped moving for just a second. That second cost him. The fuel tank tells the same story. The 4020 had 34 gallons. The 1066 carried 48. In a long pull, that extra capacity meant the 1066 didn't run dry. It just kept drinking and pulling. 14 more gallons might not sound like much, but in a sustained test of will, every gallon counts. And that's what the county fair pull was, a test of will. The 4020 was engineered for work. It was perfect for what it was designed for, a tractor that'd plow your fields and hook your loader and do it clean and efficient. It had refinement. It had brains. But the 1066 had something different. It had raw mechanical honesty. Everything on it had one purpose. The engine made torque. The TA multiplied it. The open center hydraulics moved fluid without thinking. The fuel tank was big enough to finish the job. There was no philosophy behind it except this: pull harder than the other guy. When that sled got hooked to the 1066 that Saturday night, the crowd understood something they hadn't expected to understand. Sometimes honest mechanical power beats engineered finesse. Sometimes the machine that does one thing better than anything else wins. And here's what nobody saw coming. Raw power wasn't the real advantage. What made the 1066 truly dangerous was what happened next. Here's where the story shifts from engineering to what actually happened in the shop. The 1066's DT414 engine came with an AMBAC Model 100 rotary fuel injection pump. Now, most folks don't understand what that means. What it means is this: that pump responded to a screwdriver. A good mechanic, and every county had a few, could pull the pump cover, right there. No factory service call, no shipping it back to harvester. He'd adjust the fuel delivery screw and add 10 to 15 horsepower without anything but a wrench and maybe a dynamometer if he was careful. You turned that screw, the pump sent more fuel, the engine made more power. Simple, honest. The 4020's fuel system was closed, sealed. You couldn't turn a screw and expect anything to change. You wanted more power? You sent it back to the Deere dealer. You waited. You paid. By then, the pulling season was half over. But that's not even the real advantage. When a 1066 engine got tired, and they did, because farmers pushed them hard, you didn't have to pull the whole tractor apart. The DT414 had wet sleeves. That means the cylinder liners could come out without dropping the entire block. You could overhaul the engine while it sat in the frame. Pull the head, pull the liners, hone them, replace them, reassemble. Weeks of downtime became days. Days became hours if you knew what you were doing. That mattered. At the county fair, if your pulling tractor was down for an engine rebuild, you weren't pulling. You weren't winning. You weren't building reputation. The 1066 meant you could fix your engine and be back at the next fair. The 4020 meant a trip to the dealer and maybe missing 2 or 3 events while they took their time. The torque amplifier's reliability told the same story. If you shifted it quick and clean, and good pullers learned to do it smooth, that TA could run 4,000 hours without needing replacement. Fast shifts meant no slippage. No slippage meant no heat. No heat meant longevity. The transmission stayed alive because the driver understood the machine. The 4020's power shift was tough, but it had its own weaknesses. Synchronizers, shift cables, things that wore if you pushed the machine. The TA was simpler. It was a planetary drive with its own clutch. You either engaged it or you didn't. No middle ground. No wear pattern from half shifts. It was mechanical honesty all the way down. But here's the thing that changed everything. The 1066's simplicity meant it could be modified. The DT414 could be bored out. The turbo could be swapped for something bigger. The TA could be adjusted to lock into different ratios. The open center hydraulics meant you could bolt on remote valves without starving the main circuit. The 4020 was finished the day it left the factory. It was what it was. You couldn't make it into something else without major work and major money. By 1972, word had spread through the county. The 1066 pulled harder. The 1066 was easier to fix. The 1066 could be turned up without a factory visit. Farmers started asking questions at the IH dealer that they'd never asked at Deere. Can you turn up the pump? That question started getting asked. Nobody asked it about a 4020. The 4020 was a masterpiece. The 1066 was a sledgehammer. And at the county fair, sledgehammers won. Once the 1066 proved it could outpull the 4020, something unexpected happened. Farmers stopped treating their tractors like machines they had to accept. They started treating them like machines they could build. The simplicity was the key. The 1066 invited modification the way a 4020 didn't. That DT414 engine, it could be bored. The displacement started at 414 cubic inches. A farmer with a good machine shop could open it up to 466. 40 more cubes, more compression, more air and fuel burning hotter and faster. The wet sleeves meant you didn't have to pull the whole tractor to pieces to do it. You could bore that block in frame. Keep the rest of the machine working while you built something new underneath it. The 4020 couldn't do that. Not cleanly. Not without factory intervention and the kind of downtime that had cost you pulling season. By the mid-1970s, the 1066 had become the foundation for what became known as the super stock puller. A tractor that looked stock on Saturday morning when you drove it to the fair. Green paint, original decals, factory appearance. But under that hood was a machine that had been modified for one thing and one thing only: pulling weight. Every mechanic in the county started learning the same trick: the pump screw. The AMBAC fuel injection pump on the DT414 had a simple adjustment. You pulled the cover, you found the screw, you turned it. More fuel, more boost, more horsepower. 10 horsepower, 15, 20 if you were brave and your engine was built for it. It became almost a ritual. Farmers and mechanics whispering about it like it was some secret handshake. You going to have the pump turned up for the pull? Not a question, an expectation. The 4020 didn't have that. Closed system, sealed. You couldn't turn it up without sending it back. By the time you got it back, the pull was over. But the real modification came in the transmission. The torque amplifier could be adjusted. You could lock it into lower gear ratios. What started as a tool for shifting on the go became a dedicated pulling multiplier. A farmer could set his TA to deliver pure mechanical multiplication. No thought, no finesse, just raw downward pressure on that sled. Same tractor could plow on Monday morning. Different mechanical setup, different purpose. It was like having two tractors in one frame. The open center hydraulics meant farmers could bolt on whatever they needed. Remote valves for front loaders, extra circuits for pulling equipment, hydraulic lines running in 10 different directions. A closed center system like the 4020s would starve. The charge pump couldn't feed everything, but the open center system just flowed. More demand meant more circulation. No failure, no limitation. Just honest mechanical response. By 1974, you could walk the county fairgrounds and see it clearly. The 4020s were beautiful, clean, stock, the way Deere built them. They'd pull hard, but they were finished. What you saw was what you got. The 1066s were a different animal. Some of them were bored out. Some had triple-stacked pulleys for the turbo. Some had transmission modifications you'd never see unless you looked under the hood. But here's the thing that mattered. They could become whatever the farmer needed. That was the real advantage. The 4020 was engineered perfection. The 1066 was a canvas. And farmers were artists. The real victory wasn't that the 1066 was stronger by birth. It was that the 1066 could be made into whatever the farmer had the skill and grit to build. The 4020 was locked, finished the day it left the factory. The 1066 was open, possibility every morning. But that flexibility came with a cost, one that nobody saw coming until it was far too late. By 1973, something had shifted in the county that went deeper than horsepower. Something tribal had broken. The 4020 had owned this county for 30 years straight. That's a generation, maybe more. Fathers bought green. Sons inherited green. It wasn't a choice about tractors. It was a choice about identity. You were a Deere man. That's what you said at the diner. That's what your neighbors knew. That's what your bank knew when you needed to finance equipment. Green meant solid. Green meant proven. Green meant you belonged to something. Then Saturday came. The 1066 won. And by Monday morning, the tribe was fractured. The IH dealer couldn't keep up with the traffic. Farmers who'd spent their whole lives buying green were walking in with trade-in offers for their 4020s. Not all of them, but enough that the dealer had to call the factory and order more 1066s. More tractors, more red, more everything. A dealer that had been moving maybe a handful of machines a month suddenly couldn't keep inventory on the floor. There's a particular kind of sting that comes from public defeat. A farmer who talked about his 4020 at the diner, bragged about it really, suddenly had to sit in that same booth and listen to his neighbor talk about watching his machine get outpulled by an IH. By a newcomer. That stung. I mean, it really stung. Pride's a powerful thing, and pride changes minds faster than anything else. The mechanics saw it first. The local shop owners started getting 1066s rolling in the day before the pull. Farmers wanted tune-ups. They wanted the pump turned up. They wanted to know if this red machine could be made faster, stronger, better. Can you turn up the pump? Became a question mechanics heard every week. Nobody'd ever asked that about a 4020. You didn't ask. You accepted what Deere gave you and thanked them for building it right. The resale market told the real story. A 4020 in 1970 was the gold standard. You could sell one without even advertising. Farmers lined up. 5 years later, by 1975, an IH 1066 with good hours was commanding nearly the same price. Same price, but with more pulling power, more hydraulic capacity, more of everything farmers suddenly realized they needed. The market had spoken in the only language that mattered: cash. The Whisper Network moved fast. Farmers talk. At the feed store. At church on Sunday. At the diner at 5 in the morning before the workday started. The 1066 outpulled 3 4020s last weekend. That story spread faster than any dealer advertisement could have. Faster than any magazine ad. It spread mouth to mouth because it was true. People had seen it. Their friends had seen it. The evidence was right there on the pull track. But it wasn't just about winning on Saturday. That was the thing nobody expected. The 1066 could pull in the morning and plow in the afternoon without breaking, without failing. You could push it to the limit at the fair, and then Monday morning, you were back in the field doing real work. The 4020 was getting tired. Pulling hard on Saturday meant a shop visit by Wednesday. Something always needed attention after a big pull. The 1066 just kept working. The 4020 didn't fail because it was bad. Let me be clear about that. The 4020 was engineered brilliance. It was refined. It was sophisticated. It won for 30 years because it deserved to win. But the 1066 proved something the county hadn't understood before. Good wasn't enough anymore. The county had tasted raw power, and they weren't going back to finesse. They weren't going back to closed center thinking. They wanted open center honesty. They wanted a machine that could be turned up, modified, built into whatever they needed it to be. The tribe had shifted. Red was winning, and green knew it. 30 years later, we can look back and see what that tractor pull actually meant. And it wasn't just about horsepower. The 1066 didn't kill the 4020. Let me be clear. The 4020 kept working fields for another decade, maybe two. It proved something earlier. It proved reliability. But it didn't prove what the county needed to see anymore. By 1976, the 1066 had become the foundation for what pulling became. Farmers were building dedicated superstock machines using that platform. The DT414 engine bored out to 466 cubic inches. Turbos swapped and upgraded. Transmission modifications that made the TA a pure mechanical multiplier. Hydraulic circuits redesigned for pulling purposes only. The 1066 gave them a canvas, and they painted with horsepower. International Harvester had been losing ground to Deere for years. That's just the market reality. But the 1066 gave them a foothold back. It didn't last forever. By the 1980s, the company was struggling with bigger problems. But for 5 years, maybe 6, the 1066 was proof that IH could still build something that mattered, something that won. The real lesson wasn't about the machines themselves. It was about what the market had changed into. The 4020 proved that being the best at one thing, being the most refined, most engineered, most sophisticated, doesn't guarantee survival. Markets shift. Farmers' needs change. What wins on Tuesday might lose on Saturday. Refinement doesn't matter if it's not what people are looking for anymore. The mechanic's wisdom in all this is simple. The 1066 was honest. It didn't pretend. It pulled. It was simple. It could be fixed in the shop without sending it back to the factory. It could be modified by a farmer with grit and a good mechanic. The 4020 was a finished product. Beautiful. Engineered. Perfect. But finished. The county fair pull wasn't just a competition. It was the place where farmers tested their machines against their neighbors' machines at maximum stress. The poll revealed what the field couldn't. Raw capability. Honest mechanical function under the worst possible conditions. The sled didn't care about elegance. It didn't care about closed center thinking. It just wanted to get pulled. And the machine that could do that better was the machine that won. Today, collectors restore both tractors. The 4020 still commands higher prices because parts are easier to find. Deere's production volume meant more spares survived, more documentation, more dealer support even now. But the 1066 commands respect. Because it proved something the 4020 couldn't prove. That sometimes raw power matters more than refinement. That sometimes a sledgehammer beats a masterpiece. Was the 1066 actually better? Or did it just win at one specific thing, pulling weight under maximum stress? And that one victory was enough to change an entire county's mind? Maybe that's the real question. Maybe there's no clean answer. Maybe the 1066 won because it was honest about what it was. The 4020 lost because it was too refined for what the county suddenly needed. The sled never lies. It pulls or it doesn't. The 4020 was a masterpiece. The 1066 was a sledgehammer. At the county fair, the sledgehammer won. That victory rippled through the county for years. Not because the 1066 was perfect, but because it proved that perfection isn't always what farmers need. Sometimes they need something that just works. Something honest. Something that pulls. If you've got a story about a tractor that changed your family's loyalty, drop it in the comments. Subscribe if you believe the old iron still has lessons to teach.